should Mr. Housefather stay in caucus? Have you had discussions in caucus, sir?
I've had a chance to look at the cartoon that was published this morning. Do you have any concerns or comments on the publication of that?
Yeah, I think it's appalling. I think it's anti-Semitic, and I hope they do something about it.
Do you think that this is more of a sign of the rise of anti-Semitism that we're seeing across the country?
I think it's a highly insensitive, inappropriate caricature, and it's unfortunate that it ever saw the light of day.
Could you talk about it en français?
Je trouve la caricature antisémite et je trouve malheureux que ça a vu le jour au Canada.
We were asking a lot of your colleagues on the way in about Anthony and the debate on Monday, and I know you can't say specifically what happened at caucus, but can you speak generally about, after that discussion, how are things among your friends?
We had a very warm discussion today about, of course, what transpired on Monday, but about many other things as well, and I thought, like most caucuses, it was an intensely productive discussion.
Have you spoken to Anthony Housefather since you
I
started?
have not, no.
Do you plan to?
I said that going in.
But do you plan to?
I have absolutely every desire to sit down with Anthony. Yeah.
Was he there this morning? I mean,
If you're having,
I don't talk about it.
yeah, but if you're saying that you've had a productive conversation, it was warm, and yet
Yeah,
Anthony
we don't speak about
Housefather you didn't
attendance at
talk to.
caucus. No, that's
Why
kind of a goal.
Why haven't you spoken to him yet?
I've reached out to him by text. We've exchanged text messages. Just yesterday was not. There was no opportunity, and today, well, we're halfway through it.
I'm still a bit mystified
Tension
because
is this causing this motion, this issue? How much tension is it causing? Without saying what happened in the caucus room, but in caucus in general, how much tension is this motion, this issue causing to the Liberals?
I wouldn't use the word tension. It's certainly emotional. It's an issue that's emotional across the country in communities, and it's something obviously being emotional that is reflected in our discussions.
Why was it necessary for the government to even make this negotiation with the NDP? Like Anthony Housefather said, the government could have just voted down this NDP motion. Why did it need to find a negotiation?
Well, we tried to find, we thought it was important that the Parliament of Canada, which it ultimately did, express itself by almost a 2/3 to 1/3 majority on a highly emotional and divisive issue. And I thought that was a productive thing to try and accomplish. The government thought it was also a productive thing to try and accomplish, and we're glad we got it.
Governments have for decades been voting down and ignoring non-binding motions from the opposition, treating them at the back of their hand, and you could have just simply said, we disagree with this one point, and as a cabinet we're going to vote against it. Why didn't you?
Well, we did make clear our opposition to that.
So that was a reason
motion.
to just vote against
And there are
it?
things in there that we could not have voted for. But we thought that we'd give it a try.
Why not just reject
Well,
it?
given the debates that are occurring in communities across the country, given the sorts of things that are being said, we thought if it was possible to make an attempt on a motion that is non-binding to bridge these divides and to create greater awareness of Canadian positions, but also to demonstrate to the world that Canada can come to a common view of this issue, then we thought that was worth an attempt.
Did you actually bridge divides, or did you just make them worse?
I would submit that we bridged a divide. I'd submit that a careful reading of that amended resolution brings forward a number of very, very important principles that certainly we felt strongly about. Ultimately, the New Democrats and the Bloc also felt strongly about, and I think Canadians can be proud of the work that their Parliament did.
The Canadian Jewish community disagrees with that, though. They are still very upset about the motion.
Well, that does not represent conversations that I've had with Jewish Canadians who, carefully reading that motion, see in there a lot of long-held Canadian positions that they support.
Is that a fair message to send to Anthony Housefather when he comes out and says quite emotionally that he's feeling isolated in your caucus, and now you're saying that other Jewish Canadians are fine with it, so we stand by, even though one of our caucus members was deeply upset about it?
One of the great things about the Liberal Party historically and today is that it is a place where Muslim Canadians and Jewish Canadians have found a home. And of course, on any number of issues, members may, and the Prime Minister has said this during our time in government, may express displeasure or even vote against government positions on a series of issues. I know his issues. I know Anthony's feelings on that are heartfelt, and it was a free vote, and Anthony expressed his views. And certainly, I know we're all hoping that he comes to the conclusion that his home is still in the Liberal.
Right. You say that everybody has a home, but Anthony Housefather is clearly saying he has to reflect on that. Is the government approaching this the correct way when you're hearing from someone who represents a constituency that has a number of Jewish Canadians in it? Or is the government approaching this the right way?
Well, there are a number of constituencies with Jewish Canadians in them, and many, if not most, are represented in that room. So I certainly wouldn't want to be as general as you were.
Beyond the text of the negotiated motion, Mr. Housefather objected to the way Liberal MPs, members of his own caucus, reacted. They gave a standing ovation to Heather McPherson, who he obviously felt had moved a motion he found offensive anyway.
Yeah.
So, beyond the texts, there was some emotional reaction there that made him feel isolated and left out. So how do you bridge that?
As I said going into caucus, I'm a little vague on the specifics of what actually happened in that moment. My own interpretation was that was more of an expression of relief on the part of members that we were able to come to a compromise situation. I think that's very much the spirit in which I received it. So I don't agree necessarily that that's what the purpose of whatever occurred in that moment was, but again, those are things that you can't argue with one's feelings about what one observes, but I just want to say that is not what I observed, and I don't share that view.
Will the vote on the Conservative motion be a free vote?
On the which Conservative motion?
Carbon pricing motion, will that be a free vote?
Tomorrow.
Yes.
I have every confidence that the Parliament of Canada, as it has many, many times, will vote overwhelmingly in favor of rebates for Canadians and climate action.
Will it be a whipped vote then?
I'll let others speak to those things, but
you're pretty much the one to speak about whether it's whipped or not.
That's kind of your job, is it not?
Well, no, there's a whip who does that. Look, the price on pollution has been the subject of how many? Countless resolutions in this Parliament, and I have every confidence that it will be defeated as all the others were.
Le vote d'aujourd'hui, par contre, est-ce que c'est un vote libre? Parce que théoriquement, le vote d'aujourd'hui sur la taxe carbone,
Oui.
pardon, la motion conservatrice, parce que théoriquement, on pourrait dire que c'est une promesse de campagne électorale de 2015. Donc, est-ce que c'est un vote libre ou pas?
Le prix sur la pollution a fait l'objet de combien de votes
Oui, j'ai
dans
entendu
ce
votre
Parlement?
réponse en anglais.
Oui.
Moi, je veux savoir si c'est un
Donc
vote
tu le
libre.
veux pas en français?
Ben, j'ai compris. Je parle les deux langues.
Oui.
Est-ce que c'est un vote
Mais
libre?
souvent, on veut que je
Non,
répète.
non, c'est correct.
Ouais,
Merci.
mais je
J'ai
peux
pas
te la
besoin, moi.
répéter, mais je vais te la répéter pareil.
Vous voulez pas me dire
Moi,
si c'est un
j'ai-
vote libre?
Moi, j'ai beaucoup confiance que le Parlement va rejeter de façon très, très importante la motion
Est-ce
conservatrice.
qu'ils veulent le faire librement?
J'ai énormément
Ok.
confiance.
Sur
Si on
M.
veut-
Housefather, est-ce que vous craignez que sa réflexion puisse peut-être faire des petits, que d'autres députés se disent, ben, tu sais quoi, si Anthony va si loin que ça, peut-être que moi aussi, dans le fond, je m'interroge. Avez-vous crainte d'une espèce d'effet boule de neige?
Je pense que c'est peut-être moi, étant donné mon implication, qui remonte très loin. Lorsqu'on accepte de venir dans un grand parti de compromis, de pragmatisme, comme le Parti libéral du Canada, qui est au centre, résolument au centre, on accepte qu'il y aura des compromis à faire sur bon nombre d'enjeux. Et je pense que l'entièreté de cette salle est du même avis, qu'on est là pour justement arbitrer entre les grands courants d'opinion au Canada et de prendre les décisions qui
Est-ce que
s'imposent.
M. Housefather était dans la salle aujourd'hui?
Je ne réponds jamais de façon générale pour ce qui est de l'assistance au
Do
caucus.
you have plans to talk to him later today?
I've reached out to him him. I haven't had the opportunity to check back in with him, but we've exchanged texts, and I'm hoping to.
Have you had conversations with Mr. Housefather about staying in caucus?
Sorry, I have had conversations with Anthony, not about that though, but I do think he's made his comments clear in front of the media that he's still in caucus and that we are a big team with lots of different opinions.
Are you concerned that he crossed a line? He said Monday crossed a line and that the Liberal Party has isolated him. How do you respond to that?
I'd still say he's a part of caucus and he's a part of our
Do
team.
you plan to talk to him about it, though?
I'm always open to talking to any of our members.
Will you reach out to him about it?
I've spoken to him over the last couple of days.
But you said not about him leaving caucus.
Not in particular, but for now he hasn't made any suggestions about it.
Can you clarify if you're okay with his public comments and him still staying in caucus?
We're a big team with lots of different opinions.
Okay, thank you.
Minister, can I get you, are you feeling any tension in caucus following the Israel-Hamas discussions?
No, no tension. I mean, certainly there are different people who have different perspectives. I actually think that's a virtue for the caucus in the sense that it's reflective of Canadian society. There are different perspectives, and you get to actually hear the merit in our caucus in a way that I don't think you do in Mr. Poilievre's caucus. So no.
With Liberals so low in the polls, though, and growing calls for Trudeau to resign as leader, does this complicate matters for the caucus management to show that you guys are a united front?
Again, I actually think that the essence of actually getting to good public policy decisions is to have robust debates. That's kind of the Socratic method of learning. So, no, I don't think that's an issue at all, and I actually think that it's a healthy thing to have those kinds of conversations.
One of your colleagues is contemplating leaving the caucus, though. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think Mr. Housefather will make his own determination. Certainly respect his perspective, and he certainly aired that perspective very loudly. At the end of the day, it's really up to him. So.
Have you reached out to him at all?
I was in Germany until late last night, so I have not talked to him.
Do you hope he stays?
I certainly hope he stays. I think it would be a positive thing for the caucus. I think it would be a positive thing for him, but ultimately he's going to have to decide. So.
Thank you.
I think that's great. And I did it with Mona this morning. It was excellent.
I think it was terrific, and I know Montfort Hospital is going to appreciate all that support.
Well, no, we appreciate what Montfort Hospital does for members of the Canadian Armed Forces.
What I wondered if you could speak to is just a few days ago, General Eyre on his Facebook, I think it was General Eyre on his Facebook page, noted the contributions Canadian Forces members were making to train members of the Palestinian Security Force. And I'm assuming training programs with our Palestinian friends, I don't know how we characterize them, are continuing. And again, that's in context of Minister's release saying we're not going to give any arms to our ally Israel, but we're going to continue training programs with the Palestinian Security Forces.
What I can tell you, David, is the Canadian Armed Forces, we maintain relationships with many countries in the world, and a big part of those relationships through the national defense and the Canadian Armed Forces is we provide expertise and training on a number of fronts, most of that from a defensive posture.
What kind of arms were we providing to Israel, and what's ceasing?
And again, those are questions better put, because those contracts
But you
are
are aware
approved.
of those answers.
What's that?
You are aware, though, of what?
Well, I don't have the precise details of the contracts that have taken place in the past. We have adopted a position, and it's in the hands of the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
How does this impact contracts going forward, though?
Well, the contracts that are existing are contracts, and they'll be respected and maintained going forward. That's a determination to be made by the Foreign Minister.
What does this motion change then in terms of Canadian manufacturers selling arms to Israel?
There has been rules in place for decades that require all arms trade with every other nation to be approved by the Minister of Foreign Affairs. The Minister of Foreign Affairs has made a statement with respect to there has not been any lethal weapons sent to the region and to Israel since the October 7th Hamas attack, and since January. Again, there has been no additional approvals of even non-lethal military equipment. The determination on how the motion will be interpreted and the application of those principles will be determined by the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Just coming back to training Palestinians, recognizing the PLO is not a combatant in this particular conflict, Is it still appropriate, though, for Canadian Forces members, given some of the changes that we had on Monday, to continue
just to be
training?
really clear, the type of training that we're talking about,
Yes.
we, for example, in the region with Israel and with others, do CBRN training, and that's entirely a defensive posture. There's a great deal of expertise within the Canadian Armed Forces in how people can protect their communities from those very real threats.
What liabilities do we have, though, if we do cancel contracts by sending arms to...
Well, again, that's a determination. It depends on the contract, and I can't comment on any individual
monetary
ones.
liability?
Again, I'm not going to comment on any individual contract. Thanks.
Not so much what happened in the caucus meeting, but I guess the question we've been asking people is how much tension is this motion and the issue of Palestine-Gaza causing within the caucus?
Well, I think there's great tension on the issue overall, not specific to caucus, but just in the Canadian public, and people feel very strongly. I feel very strongly. On the motion on Monday, I think we got to a very good place. I've written about this, but I think the amendments largely addressed challenges in the motion, and you saw overwhelmingly members from 4 parties come together and pass that motion. And had we had more time to debate those amendments, which I think is a fair challenge there, I think you'd probably have seen even more people that would have voted for it. So I think the real question is, why don't the Conservatives support a ceasefire?
Your Liberal Party, though, according to the NDP, was negotiating with them for days beforehand on these amendments. Was the Liberal caucus aware of this?
Aware that there were negotiations?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, concerns
So
have
then
been...
what do you mean, then, I wish we had more time to debate? Can you elaborate on that?
The specific amendments were introduced at the 11th hour, so yeah, I mean, if one cares about doing this in a detailed way, and one's voting on a motion that we've debated all day, then sure, of course, I would appreciate it. Now, I was able to go through the amendments before the vote. I was able to write about the amendments before the vote, and I published it shortly thereafter. So it's not that we had no time, but more time would have been helpful, especially on such a charged issue.
What do you feel about one of your caucus colleagues saying that they're considering their position with the Liberal Party?
I remember when the party broke its promise on electoral reform, and I had major challenges that day as someone who cared about electoral reform going back to the very beginning of my politics, talking about it in my own nomination. So I understand, to some extent at least, probably not the full extent, what Anthony's going through. I would say Anthony's a great colleague. We share many of the same views. I don't know that he is going to find a home in any other party as much of a home as he's got in the Liberal Party, and he has a great contribution here in the House, and I hope he runs again. I hope he runs again for the Liberals.
Do you have concerns, though, that people are going to look at this and say, wow, they can't even manage their own caucus, people are considering leaving, how are they going to continue to manage a nation?
No, I think it's healthy to have disagreement in caucus. It's healthy to have disagreement outside of caucus. Reasonable disagreement is the foundation of our democracy, and it's a big part of the Liberal Party. I ran for this party in part because of a commitment to free votes in the House and that kind of reasonable, thoughtful disagreement. And on charged issues, things can get really tough sometimes, but so long as we commit to those conversations and that kind of debate, I think we're all better off.
Have you sent Mr. Housefather a note or reached out to him? Or anything?
Not since Monday, but I will. And I spoke to him before, I think last week or last time we were in Ottawa, maybe. Yeah, Anthony's a friend, and yeah, absolutely.
One of the things that he...
and by the way, I did only recently see, you're asking me now, but I did only recently see his comments about potentially leaving caucus, and so it's on my list of things to reach out to him directly.
One of the things that he raised as a concern wasn't just the text of the motion or how the amendments came in so late, but it was also that members of the caucus stood up and applauded. He felt they were giving a standing ovation to the NDP and the member who he felt had introduced a motion that had anti-Semitic or anti-Israel components.
There was nothing anti-Semitic in that motion. There was nothing anti-Semitic in that motion. That motion could be fairly contrasted anti-Israel in a way, I suppose, in the sense that it was contrary to, you had Israel's ministers calling up the Prime Minister, debating about that motion, disagreeing with that motion, so it was certainly contrary to the views of Israel. But when you look and you run down that list of things in the motion, there was one particularly controversial piece. One could read it different ways. Some people read it as unilateral recognition. I read it differently. I mean, I don't think any unilateral recognition was ever going to be useful at all. And you see David Cameron, the UK foreign minister, talk about we don't necessarily need to recognize, we wouldn't recognize Palestine at the beginning of this process because that would be before any Palestinian reform, but you don't necessarily want to recognize it at the end of the process either, else Israel be the gatekeeper of Palestinian statehood. And so there is, I think, a very thoughtful conversation that needs to be happening as between allies, the UK, the US, Canada, and others, to determine what is the best process going forward. But you know, and an NDP opposition motion isn't the best place to have those thoughtful conversations. We got to a very good place in the end.
But his concern was that he felt very isolated by members who were standing up and applauding a motion that even most Liberals, the Liberal government was not going to support. Do you think that was a problem? Do you think that sent a message to him that he doesn't belong?
No, he absolutely belongs. You've got the Liberal cabinet that was not going to support that motion absent amendments that is consistent with his view and his position. So he certainly should feel aligned with the Liberal government on that front. Look, there are many disagreements, including on this issue, and sometimes those conversations can be incredibly charged. But there's absolutely a place for Anthony in this caucus, just as I've disagreed at times. I've felt on the outs at different times over my 8-year career, and I have a home in the Liberal caucus, and that's as it should be.
Are you concerned, though, that if Mr. Housefather goes as far as to have this public reflection on his future with the Liberal Party, it could inspire or trigger a similar reflection within other members of your caucus?
No, not at all. I think he was honest in a moment in time in politics, and honesty is important in politics.
But you think he's the only one who feels that way? Or that far, I guess?
I expect so, but you'd have to ask my colleagues. I certainly don't feel that way.
Was he in caucus today to participate in some of these conversations?
He was not here in person, to my knowledge, but I may have that wrong. He might have been online. I'm not sure.
And do you think you were able to successfully have some, as Steven MacKinnon put it, warm discussions without him being present today?
There were many serious, thoughtful interventions on this issue. Yeah.
Do you disagree there's tension then within the caucus, as some Liberal MPs have characterized?
On which issue?
On Israel-Hamas.
I know, but my joke. There's lots of tension on lots of issues.
That's a deflection, but like.
No, on this and many, yeah. But well, I mean,
do you think that there's
we're in politics. Where is there isn't? You know, on what issue do we agree on absolutely everything? As 150 some odd people, right? Like.
Yeah, but we see Polyev able to get his caucus together and all agree unanimously on something. How come there is not that management within the Liberal Party?
I would not run for a party with that kind of authoritarian management. I can't believe that that's what we want in our democracy. I think the idea that there's tension
on the motion. I know you have thoughts.
Genuinely, it's a nice thing to ask about, but genuinely it's overblown.
Well, when you have a caucus member saying that they're considering leaving because they don't feel they belong, I mean, that's more tension.
Well, no, but that would be different than if you had the vote without amendments and it was split significantly between caucus. Look, I've been the only member at times getting up and voting. There were 3 members on this. We're talking a very small number of people who felt so strongly they were voting differently, right? That's not a lot of tension. There have been other issues where there have been more tension, where a larger bulk of colleagues have been disagreeing.
You think it would have been worse if the motion had gone to the floor without the amendments?
It would have been much more divisive. There's no question.
Do you think some people have said that it might have even have passed because of division? That, to me, seems like really big numbers.
It seems impossible because the Conservatives are a very large bloc, and the Conservatives don't want a ceasefire. So.
Yeah, no, but people seem to be suggesting that there were that many Liberals that could have voted with the original motion.
Yeah.
But that seems like a lot of people.
The math would not add up there.
Okay.
I do think it's interesting, though. I mean, the conversation around tension is an important one. I do want Anthony to stay in caucus, and I hope he doesn't feel so strongly that he has to leave. But my lesson from Monday was very different. My lesson from Monday is that when you look across party lines, we were able to largely find unity across parties on a very fraught issue, and the Conservatives were absolutely clear, contrary to most Canadians, most parliamentarians, that they do not want a ceasefire. And they should be explaining that to
I just wanted to ask you that you're saying that you have stood alone in votes. We've seen that before. But have you ever felt isolated in caucus before, the same way that?
I don't think it could possibly be the same because of the, he got up and gave a very impassioned speech about being a Zionist, and it's clearly part of his identity in a way that electoral reform is something I'm passionate about, but not part of my identity. So I would not compare the situations, and I would expect that I've never felt isolated in the same way, and I've not had the same musings publicly that he's had. So I would not compare the situation. I would only say I have been in a situation where I have disagreed. I've been the only one disagreeing at different times, or one of only 2, and so I have some sense of what it can feel like, but not to the same degree.
Do you think caucus is taking his concerns seriously right now, that they're actually listening to what he's saying about feeling this isolation?
Yeah, I think there's a real concern making sure that he feels like he's part of the family, part of the team, and yeah, that's. I think that the idea of tension is overblown, but there's an absolute concern about making sure that everyone feels welcome and everyone feels like they continue to have a voice on behalf of their communities.
Is there a concern that he might leave?
Isn't there a bill coming?
No.
There isn't?
What do you mean?
Because I thought there was a bill coming on the order paper.
Oh, yeah, but
Yeah.
I mean, calling electoral reform is,
Okay, so what?
is very strong.
So what would you like to see then?
Electoral reform?
And then what's in the bill?
The three changes.
Yeah.
The three changes
Yeah.
that are part of the deal with
Yeah.
the NDP.
That's going to be in the bill.
That's what I would expect.
Okay.
And I would expect those are changes that are really about making voting easier.
Mhm.
But they don't change the voting system.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. I wish.
To stand against it. What do you say to your constituents about the Congress today?
Well, as I've said to my constituents, the actual federal backstop puts more money back into the pockets of my constituents on an 8 out of 10 basis. You know, I've been very strong as an advocate to push for adjustments to the federal backstop, higher rural rebates. We exempted home heating oil, and we put in place a really strong affordability program on heat pumps to help people make a transition. Now, if the premiers do not like the federal backstop, I think we have a great opportunity. Let's get them to the table and talk about cap and trade. Let's get them to the ability to actually look at ways in which we can do carbon pricing differently. If they're that dead set against the federal backstop, remember, there's a reason why it's a backstop. It's because the premiers didn't actually come up with a plan that met the national criteria. So let's look at different options that are out there, and that's what I'll be encouraging if that's what MLAs do.
There's also a diversity of positions within the Jewish community, just like there are across Canada, and that's the pride and praise of the Liberal Party and of our caucus.
So you don't feel isolated right now?
No, I do not.
And are you trying to get Mr. Housefather to stay in caucus? Have you had conversations with him?
We're always having conversations, and this is where we have the opportunity to share views and strengthen Canada.
About specifically staying in caucus?
Anthony Housefather is a valued member of our caucus, and we will continue to have conversations to make sure everyone's voice is heard.
Minister, did you change your view?
Pardon me, can we just ask you about this cartoon of Baby and that bus?
So this, I will say this, political discourse is important in this country, as is political criticism. To see that, to see anti-Semitic tropes used in a national publication like this is just egregious.
Can I just double check? You would have voted over here, Minister. Sorry, you would have voted against the NDP motion unamended,
no
but
such thing.
no,
I'm a member of cabinet and voted
Oh,
for
I see.
cabinet. Thank you.
Can you clarify if you understand there to be an arms embargo based on that motion?
And I stand by the decision of the government.
Why not do that for other things, other fuels? I get that heating oil costs a lot more, but a lot of the arguments that are being made for other, whether it's natural gas or even electric cars, is that people can't make that transition today. So right now, it's just a tax.
We literally have a program, as I said, if I go back to the federal backstop, the way it operates is that people are receiving more money back. I know that there's a price signal that has a cost. What the Conservatives aren't talking about is the fact that that money actually goes back to households. So you're talking about a price signal and an impact. What we're not talking about is the fact that those households that you're referencing are getting more money back than they're paying in. We still have incentive programs that are out there. I talked about the oil to heat pump program. That's one specific program amongst the plethora that the government has to help people, including in situations that are on propane, on natural gas, to be able to limit the amount of energy that they use on their home energy bill. So there's a plethora of different programs out there, and I think at the end of the day, it's a program that made sense. I stand by the decision.
Do you think the government's done a poor job of selling this tax so far, given how it seems to be very unpopular among the populace and premiers?
Look, I think we're talking a program that has a lot of nuance. We're highlighting the fact that the way in which the program works, that the money goes back. If you sit in the House of Commons, the opposition is doing a very effective job at not giving Canadians a full view of the way that this program works. Mr. Poilievre will talk all the time about the price signals, never about the rebates, never about the fact that the money's returned to households, and whether or not he even supports carbon pricing. I asked a question today in the House the other day, do the Conservatives support any form of carbon pricing? We have not heard whether or not that's the case. Canadians deserve a real environmental plan from the official opposition, and there has not been one to date.
You probably were asked this off the top, I missed it, but the increase on April 1st, there's a lot of provinces that are calling for that to stop. What's your position
I think we've got a great unique opportunity. Bonnie Crombie came out and talked about the idea, presumably, that there would be an industrial price that she would support. There are other examples of how carbon pricing exists in this country. Quebec and California being one example of a cap and trade. British Columbia has its own program that Premier Eby has been very supportive of. If those 7 premiers that are writing to the Government of Canada don't like the idea of putting 8 out of 10 families ahead in their provinces, they don't like the way the federal backstop works, they've got options. Why don't they come to the table? Let's look at working across multiple jurisdictions on an industrial price and a cap and trade that could change the way in which carbon pricing works. Remember, the Prime Minister's goal from day one was not necessarily a federal backstop. It was to have a credible carbon pricing plan as part of our environmental agenda. The premiers can't say they don't believe in carbon pricing either. They all adopted output-based pricing systems. So at the end of the day, if they are so upset with the federal backstop, I invite them to have that conversation. I'd be happy to try to facilitate it with my own government, and I know that we'd be open to it. But there's a reason why the federal backstop came in. And provinces either submitted a plan that was not going to meet the national standard. So in Nova Scotia's case, Tim Houston shows up in August of 2022. I'm not going to do anything. I don't want to do any of this. He did it ultimately move forward with output-based pricing system. Cap and trade was never going to work in a province as small as Nova Scotia.
We have unfortunately been close on this. But, you know, I'm going to leave it to them. Believe in the table, believe in the table. Right?
Is there any inference? You were pretty clear, like last summer, that you guys did not check in.
Yeah.
And it seems to be a constant messaging from this government. Now look to us. Yeah. Look to yourself. So is it fair for them to say, we're not getting any, rescue from the government?
Well, yeah, I'm not. We're not like other governments that came before us. I do believe in the table. The best deals are made at the table. I've made it very clear in statements that I've made before that if employers or unions or anybody was kind of not paying attention to the table as the rightful and proper place to negotiate a deal because government will just legislate everybody back to work, don't count on it. Yeah, so anyway, but keep us posted and he'll keep you updated on anything.
I just wanted to ask you, are you concerned about Anthony Housefather's comments if he's reflecting on his position in caucus right now?
First I heard of it from you right now. Anthony's a good friend. I've got it's just tough, and I imagine it's going to be a tough meeting. I should get to it.
But the protesters in front of the legislature in St. John's budgets. What are you hearing about that? What's going on with this?
Well, it's heightened. Obviously, tempers are heightened. It's thanks very much. I've been watching video of friends of mine in some of those situations right now. So it's harried. It's they had to delay a budget.
Yeah.
So this is serious stuff. I know the Premier's treating it seriously. I know the ministers involved are treating it seriously. There's a lot of heightened tensions. You have to remember fishermen borrow an awful lot of money and don't go before the capital outlay. In other words, their boats, their equipment, and everything. They rely on a good price. They went through a hard time last year. So not wading into it.
Politically,
out of my jurisdiction, but as an Newfoundland Labrador,
you've got Bay Bulls and all that in your riding, etc. All those guys.
Look at
Teddy
you.
Harbor.
Don't forget Witless Bay if we're going to go all the way, David.
There we are. But it seems to me fisheries politics can be deadly for a politician if you get on the wrong side of fisheries politics. In other words, it's really important to get it right for the fishers.
It's really important to get it right because I don't think, first of all, it is atrociously hard work. I used to work mornings. I didn't particularly like it, but I didn't have to go to the high seas at 4 a.m. Trying to catch. It's hard work. You are not seeing more young people getting involved. I know a lot of older fishermen who've been counting on their sons and daughters, but they had the gall to go away to get MBAs and law degrees and medical degrees and start businesses and stuff, and they're not taking it up. You have fishermen with huge amounts of investments made in equipment, and they're not getting the price that they need. That, I think anybody out there can understand, more of us than not, what that means when you've got a huge amount of debt and suddenly you recognize that your salary is going to be decreased substantially because of price that's set that's out of your control. It's a lot. It weighs on people a lot. As we say back home, it rubs nerves raw.
And I just wanted to ask you said there's going to be some difficult conversations today. Is caucus taking seriously what Anthony Housefather said about feeling isolated? Because what we're hearing a lot this morning is there's a diversity of opinions.
I don't want to get into the meeting because the meeting is sacred. But let's just say I know from, we've been talking about this an awful long time. We take this absolutely seriously. And we've been together as a caucus now, including Anthony with us, who's a friend of mine, one of the first people I met when I got here. 9 years almost now. This is, when I say it's family, I'm not being trite. It is. I imagine that's how it's being treated in there, certainly in their lobbies, and we've been reaching out to one another outside of that too.
Why do you think it's tough, though? Can you explain sort of what is?
Why is the Middle East tough?
why? I'm not trying to be impertinent. I'm just trying to get you to expand on, I think you're clearly articulating something that we're seeing in the public, and I'm just wondering if you can expand a bit on that, why it's tough and particularly for your caucus.
Oh, I think, it's just, a lot of these are, frankly, personal conversations, private conversations. I want to keep them as such. But it is, you have people in this country who represent constituent groups that are absolutely directly involved in what is happening in Gaza and in the Middle East in general, and who represent constituents, some of both sides, and many Canadians who just know that they want something done and we're just not sure how and how we can contribute. But this is tough. This is definitely one of the toughest issues that not only we have faced as a caucus. I think it's reflective of just where a lot of people are in Canada.
And is it your understanding that the motion on Monday created an arms embargo on Israel? Because there seems to be a lot of misunderstanding about that. People in your caucus say it did, others say it didn't.
Yeah,
it's status quo.
I think the best one to go
clarify.
The best ones to go to that really are Minister Joly. I don't want to get in over my skis on it. I have a certain understanding of it, but I would really prefer if Minister Joly spoke to that directly. You can ask her.
And did you take part in the standing ovation for Heather McPherson on Monday?
I don't recall. I don't know. My support is not necessarily reflective of whether I stand or don't stand.
I guess it was one of the things that Anthony Housefather raised. She and many of the DP members were wearing keffiyehs, which is a symbol of Palestinian statehood and resistance.
Yeah.
And then the Liberals stood up and applauded them. Do you understand why that would?
Yeah. I mean, there's a whole load of sensitivities, and we are, this is not the end of it. These conversations are going on, and actually I'm missing
Why did the government have to negotiate, though? Why couldn't they have just, Anthony said, voted down the end of the motion?
Let me go in, because I think I'm missing some of that.
Will you ask me to stay if you see him in caucus?
Don't directly in caucus.
What would you expect? What kind of discussion would you like to see when you guys meet this morning, given what's happened this week? What sort of discussions would you like to see?
We always have frank conversations with one another. So I think sometimes what's important is that we hear people out, see what the mood is, get a sense of how people are feeling, and then we talk about it. We're all friends, we're all colleagues, we all get along, even when there are disagreements. I've talked to you many times before about the fact that the Liberal Party is a microcosm of society. The Prime Minister has often talked about the fact that that's where we derive our strength from, and I expect that we're going to see that type of strength, that type of microcosmic symbolism of the country reflected in our discussions.
We're not exporting arms to Israel. We're not exporting arms to Israel, but our Canadian military are still training Palestinian military with the PLO. Do you think that makes a lot of sense, that we're training the PLO, that General Blair just posted on his Facebook page how proud he was, and Minister Joly says we're not going to help our ally Israel with some small arms exports?
Some of the announcements are relatively fresh, so I'm going to take some time to chat with the minister today, get a sense of, in depth, what the details of that policy
Is it clear to you whether or not there is an arms embargo, or whether there is just a stop on permits? Because the NDP, people in the Muslim community, believe that the government has agreed to an arms embargo, and the government won't answer that question.
Yeah, well, as I just said a moment ago, I'm going to have conversations this morning. Some of this is fresh, so I want to have an opportunity to sit down in depth and have conversations with the minister and others to make sure I have a deeper understanding.
Et à quel point vous avez été déçu de la façon dont le gouvernement s'est conduit dans cette négociation-là et dans ce vote-là?
Dans un monde idéal, il y avait plus de temps pour considérer des aspects de l'émotion, mais c'est la nature des politiques des fois que des choses changent aux dernières minutes. Mais comme j'ai dit hier, c'est important pour moi qu'on a l'opportunité comme caucus de discuter qu'est-ce qui est arrivé et voir s'il y a des choses qu'on peut faire différemment.
Qu'est-ce qui vous déçoit, juste un follow-up on this, qu'est-ce qui vous déçoit le plus?
Ben, je ne sais pas si je suis agréable avec la question, en français, je pense qu'on dit la pyramide de questions, le premise de questions. C'est pas que je suis déçu, c'est que je pense que idéalement, on avait peut-être plus de temps pour discuter en avant. C'est pas qu'est-ce qui est arrivé. OK? Alors, on va continuer avec les discussions pour voir s'il y avait des choses qu'on peut faire différentes la prochaine fois qu'il y a une motion comme ça.
Have you seen the cartoon that was published today in the French media?
No.
Okay.
Are the divisions in caucus over this issue getting worse?
Well, I mean, you guys use the word division all the time. That that means perhaps something different to you as media or to others than it does to us. I think we have disagreements. We have difficult conversations. That's natural. Would you expect in any political party that has 170 members of parliament from all across the country that we're going to agree on every single thing? So there are going to be disagreements, and that's okay. That's healthy. That reflects the nature of the country, and I'm going to continue to say that. So I think that there will be conversations that continue, and that's a good thing.
Mr. Housefather said that he was reflecting on his place as a Liberal right now. Is he alone in that thought? Like, are you also taking some time to consider your place in this party?
No, I said very clearly yesterday, I'll say very clearly again. I'm extremely comfortable as a Liberal. I'm extremely comfortable sitting as a Liberal, and I have not given and will not be giving any consideration to my future.
You just mentioned a second ago, you don't think there's really deep divisions in the caucus right now. So do you think it's fair to say that Mr. Housefather's comments are kind of isolated and others don't feel like that? Or?
Well, I'm not going to comment on how Anthony's feeling. Anthony is a good friend of mine. He's a great colleague. He's an exceptionally important voice in our caucus and an exceptionally important voice in Parliament. But I'll let him speak for how he's feeling. So far as I'm concerned, I feel comfortable within the Liberal caucus. And I'm not
Pendant qu'il se questionne, lui, Monsieur Housefather, qu'est-ce que vous allez lui dire s'il vous demande conseil?
Non, mais j'ai rien à dire. Il a dit déjà qu'il va réfléchir. C'est important pour lui de prendre le temps qu'il a besoin de prendre pour réfléchir. Comme il a dit, pour moi, il est un ami, il est un collègue tellement important. Ça fait aucune différence à moi si il prend des décisions dans le futur. Ça ne change pas la réalité que nous sommes des amis et des collègues.
Can we talk about it? It's Benjamin Netanyahu.
Have you asked him to stay in caucus with you? What? Should Mr. Housefather?
Sorry, repeat the question.
I just want to know if you've had conversations with Mr. Housefather yesterday or this morning about him staying in caucus. Do you want him to stay?
Of course I do. Anthony has said that he's going to reflect, and it's not for me to comment on the decisions that he comes to. I'll repeat, he's a great friend, he's a great member of our caucus, he's a great parliamentarian. His voice has been important and will continue to be important, and of course I hope that following his reflections that he feels as though the Liberal Party remains a place that he wants to sit, and so long as he's there, I'll continue to be a good colleague and a good friend, and if he comes to decisions that see us sitting elsewhere, then he'll remain a good friend and a good
Is that something that you're expecting, that he might, cross the floor?
No, I'm not going to comment any further.
Is that something he's talked to you?
I expect. No, I think he's said publicly what he said over the last couple of days, which is that he's having a deep reflection. So I think those questions are best posed to him.
And did you have conversations with him last night or anything about trying to get him to stay?
No, my conversations with Anthony are always about our mutual values, about the ways in which we support each other, and of course I commend him on the voice that he's used in Parliament, and I'll always do that regardless of what the circumstances are. Thanks. Guys.
Looking into a continuation of the suspension of an arms trade. I'm certainly not an expert on what that means. My understanding is that Canada does not deal in lethal weapons or arms with Israel, and it's also just sort of like I won't say it's a misnomer, but Canada as a country is not an arms dealer. There are companies in Canada that do business with other companies in other countries. So I think that's going to be reviewed as a result of the motion, which, as we all know, is non-binding.
Right, but the government said it would implement. What do you make of Anthony Housefather's comments? Do you think he should stay in caucus after saying that?
Yes, I'm good friends with Anthony, and what I said to Anthony in confidence between the two of us was that I'm glad that we can disagree and still be friends. I think a lot of Canadians are struggling with this notion that we might have different opinions than our neighbors or our friends or our family sometimes, and that's okay. That's part of being good neighbors, and just recognizing that we're all entitled to our views and our opinions. And a lot of them are steeped in tradition and family, and we're all reconciling with that. It's I respect everybody and their own opinion and their background and their experience is different than mine. And I think what I'm really proud of this Liberal caucus is that we don't all have the same opinion. And Canada doesn't only have one opinion either. I don't believe in this like sort of one true opinion approach to politics. I think having important conversations really resembles the conversations that Canada is having right now.
Yesterday, before your presser defending the carbon tax, you guys had a new slogan in the presser. It was keep the cash there for climate. Is that like your new slogan to counteract attacks? Or?
Well, you know, I think unfortunately slogans have become more sort of pervasive in our political dialogue, which I don't actually think is that productive. Maybe it's a convincing way to get our point across. Mm-hmm. But the reality is that carbon pricing works. Carbon pricing works here in Canada, and it works in the EU. It works in California, and most of the states in the United States that have it. It's a really effective way to lower our emissions.
But with so many provinces and provincial leaders at all sort of different party levels now coming out against it, Canadians seem to be swayed by that position. How does the government salvage this policy at this point?
Well, I remind people who I'm in touch with on a frequent basis that I ran on a commitment to lower our emissions. I ran on a commitment to protect our environment and to do everything that I could in my power as a local MP to fight climate change. And that requires us as Canadians to have a hard look at how many fossil fuels and how much fossil fuels we use on a regular basis in our daily lives, in our businesses, how we generate electricity in some provinces, because that needs to change. If we want to leave a healthy planet and environment for future generations, then Canada actually has an obligation. We're a small country, we're only 40 million people, and you know, people will say, oh, Canada's only responsible for 1.5% of global emissions. What we forget in that is that we're also only 0.5%.
All right, thanks. Yeah, let's try again. Have you seen this cartoon? What do you make of it?
Well, as Heritage Minister, I'm going to be very prudent around the independence of the press. But what I am going to say is that, of course, you know, with everything happening right now in the Middle East and the tension that it's bringing in Canada as well, because communities are feeling this conflict very profoundly. That it's normal that there's critiques with such a cartoon.
Est-ce que ça s'aplace un dessin comme ça de la part de M. Chapelot ce matin?
Ben, écoutez, je me prononcerai pas sur le fond parce que comme ministre du patrimoine, je respecte évidemment l'indépendance des médias puis également l'indépendance des caricaturistes. Mais évidemment, dans la situation présentement au Moyen-Orient, alors que c'est extrêmement tendu puis les communautés partout au Canada ressentent ce conflit-là de façon très personnelle et de façon très vive, c'est sûr que ce genre de caricatures-là vont soulever la critique. Et je pense que c'est sain de critiquer les médias, c'est sain de critiquer les politiciens, mais il faut avoir des conversations qui sont respectueuses puis qui placent la compassion puis le respect des communautés à l'avant-plan.
C'est tendu dans votre caucus aussi. Est-ce que M. Housefather a encore sa chance? C'est tendu aussi dans votre caucus. Là. Que va penser M. Housefather d'ailleurs de ce dessin?
Ben, écoutez, je pense que le Parti libéral, c'est un reflet de la population canadienne. On est un caucus qui est extrêmement diversifié. La communauté juive est présente, la communauté musulmane est présente et toute la diversité, la communauté de SLGBTQ+, est présente au sein du Parti libéral. C'est ce qui fait notre force. C'est ce qui fait qu'on est capable d'avoir des discussions qui reflètent vraiment l'ensemble des discussions qui se passent dans la population canadienne. Ça fait de nous, je pense, un gouvernement qui est plus fort, qui est plus près de la population. Puis évidemment, le Parti libéral est plus fort avec Anthony Housefather et Anthony Housefather est plus fort aussi au sein du Parti libéral.
English on Mr. Housefather, does he still have his place in the Liberal Party?
The Liberal Party is a reflection of the Canadian population. We are an extremely diverse caucus. There's Jewish people and Muslim people and two LGBTQI+ communities also in our caucus, and this is what makes us stronger because we can have those difficult conversations. And I love Anthony; he's a dear colleague, and of course he makes our caucus stronger. And I think that the Liberal Party also makes Anthony stronger. So I hope that he stays with us. We're a reflection of the Canadian population. I think it's important conversations that we're having. Thank you.
Mr. Miller, can we ask you about the decision to lift the quotas and whether you're going to prioritize that or make sure that people who've already gotten out of Gaza and are in Egypt will be able to come to Canada?
Well, look, we've only been able to see 14 people come out of Gaza into Egypt since the inception of the program. I think there's a tension between publicly supporting individual efforts to people to extract themselves, sometimes with dubious actors and bribing people, including perhaps even criminal elements, to save their own lives. That can't be an official policy of the government of Canada. We're people to get out into safety. We're glad that they're safe, and if they fall within the ambit of the program, gladly go to the next step of going through biometrics in Cairo and then eventually getting them to Canada. This is a program that we knew from the get-go could be a failure. Up to now, it is a failure, and it's something I think we need to recognize. That said, a lot of elements that are way beyond our control, including the operation of Rafah Gates and the governments that control that.
But people in Egypt will not be, who already made their way to Egypt will not be excluded. Will they be given any extra assistance since they're already out?
In individual cases, we can look at them. This is a program that was intended towards people that have family connections into Canada. Once people are in Egypt, they are safe, and that's a good thing. But this is Canada's effort to get people out. And we will obviously lift the cap. That the new number is not something that we have figured out yet. We have a sense of what that is, but not prepared to speculate on what that new number is. But clearly we have said time and time again, and we are issuing codes to people that have submitted applications in order to further the process. But again, the real gating issue is getting people to safety into Egypt and then eventually into Canada.
So how sorry, I know you're not comfortable revealing the number right now, but can you give us any kind of ballpark figures in terms of what this new cap will be?
We're issuing additional codes, and those applications are going through the system. That's sort of a very technical answer for you, but the reality is that if we are able to extract more people from Rafah, that there will be the availability to come to Canada would people pass the biometric test.
Have you spoken to Anthony Housefather about his concerns yesterday?
Brief exchange, obviously. Anthony and I are friends. And I understand where he's coming from. It is extremely emotional for him. It's extremely emotional for his constituents. I believe that the text of the motion as amended was one that was fair and the Government of Canada could get behind and be proud of. The reality, and tied in Mia to your last point, is the adoption of that motion doesn't help getting people out of Rafah. The Israeli government has been quite clear in saying they are watching the actions of the Canadian government, and any actions that are seen as to be unfavorable can affect their decision-making at the highest political level. And so we can't be naive as a country as to the actions that we take and the impact that that can have on the ground and for actual people's lives. I'm not saying the motion was a bad thing to adopt. I think it represents a principled position of Canada as amended, but actions of the Government of Canada has consequences, and on the particular impact of that program, I don't think that motion is necessarily a good thing.
Sur la motion, mais aussi sur M. Housefather, vous aimeriez pouvoir lui dire quoi alors qu'il réfléchit?
Je lui dirai en privé, et je lui ai déjà communiqué, je comprends sa position, je comprends que c'est très émotionnel pour lui et d'autant plus pour ses commettants. Anthony, c'est une personne qui défend farouchement les intérêts de ses commettants, la plupart desquels sont de confession juive. Alors je comprends le trauma à travers lequel il passe et ce que Anthony ressent. Alors ce que je vais lui communiquer, évidemment, c'est quelque chose qui va être de nature privée.
Au début, la motion au Conseil des ministres, on n'était pas sûr qu'on était pour voter en faveur des amendements.
La motion était inacceptable.
Donc,
la reconnaissance unilatérale de l'État de la Palestine, ça aurait été une erreur et continuerait d'être une erreur monumentale à l'absence d'une discussion sur une solution à deux États.
Mais ce que je comprends, c'est que l'amendement...
L'emploi pour l'immigration avec le pays Haïti, en ce moment, est-ce que vous comptez le réouvrir avec ce qui se passe, la dégradation du pays?
C'est quelque chose qu'on regarde. C'est clair que la voie qu'on avait pour avoir 15 000 personnes des Amériques, c'était quelque chose qui comprenait des Haïtiens. Là, la difficulté, c'est de pouvoir sortir les gens d'Haïti si l'aéroport est fermé et puis la voie d'issue à la République dominicaine est fermée. Il y a des gens qui ont appliqué sous cette enveloppe ils sont éligibles à sortir. Notre emphase pour l'instant, c'est sur ces mêmes personnes. Mais maintenant, il y a une difficulté accrue de les sortir avec ce qui se passe en Haïti.
Monsieur Miller, juste un petit instant donc à Québec, on commence à parler de front commun. Il y a le front commun, l'idée qui se dessine, je sais que le gouvernement Legault a dit non, mais hypothétiquement...
C'est d'un front commun. Quelqu'un a dit.
Oui, quelqu'un a proposé.
Quelqu'un a proposé un front commun.
Disons, si jamais ça pouvait prendre forme, est-ce que ça changerait quelque chose pour vous? Si jamais les partis... Parce qu'il y a quand même eu des motions...
très hypothétique avec déjà des gens qui sont...
Il y a quand même eu des motions unanimes à l'Assemblée nationale.
Des motions unanimes?
Oui.
Des motions unanimes.
Mais sur les rapatriements...
Sur les juges de la Cour suprême?
Sur le rapatriement de
Et en mal lu le texte
pouvoirs.
du jugement de la Cour suprême?
Je sais pas, mais est-ce que c'est pour vous...
motion unanime à la Cour
l'Assemblée nationale. Mais est-ce que pour vous, ça changerait quelque chose, un front commun, si jamais il y a...
C'est une question très hypothétique.
D'accord. Donc...
Okay, thank you. Thanks, guys.
Monsieur Champagne, vous en pensez quoi, la caricature de Jafflot?
Je ne l'ai pas vue, mais si vous m'avez informé, vous me la montrez, ça va me faire plaisir de
commenter.
commenter.
Faire ça pendant que Raphaël vous pose d'autres questions.
Oui, les postes de quartier, postes de police chinois, donc ma collègue justement et votre collègue Mme Mendez, donc qui semblait pas vraiment, je dirais, embarrassée par cette situation-là. Vous, je sais que vous voyez les choses peut-être un peu différemment, mais c'est pas un peu bizarre le fait d'être aussi près ou de ne pas désavouer un peu ça?
Ben, je vous dirais, j'avais, dans les circonstances que vous faites état de cet événement-là, moi, j'avais aucune façon de savoir les gens qui seraient présents à cette activité-là. C'est regrettable, mais je pense que les gens qui nous regardent, écoutez, je rencontre des centaines de personnes par semaine, alors j'ai pas les moyens de savoir à chaque fois, dans les circonstances où on organise un événement, c'est vraiment aux organisateurs de faire un peu cette diligence-là raisonnable avec les gens qui devraient être
Mais là, c'est plus que ça, c'est-à-dire que Mme Mendez défend la présence de ces gens-là, elle semble près de ça. Je veux dire, il ne faut pas...
Ben, moi, j'ai été clair en disant que si j'avais su, je n'aurais pas été là. Maintenant, ses propos à elle, ça lui appartient. Moi, ce que je trouve, c'est regrettable parce que, comme vous avez vu dans les circonstances, écoutez, on m'invite à un événement, les organisateurs organisent, ils invitent les gens. Ce que je peux dire, c'est qu'évidemment, c'est regrettable. On espère toujours faire mieux. Mais je pense aussi que les gens comprennent.
Il faudrait qu'elle se dissocie de ça ou qu'elle revienne un
je
peu
pense
sur
que
ses propos.
c'est à elle de
quel
voir,
message ça envoie?
Ben, j'en conviens, mais c'est vraiment à elle. Je pense que la question devrait lui poser, puis je suis sûr qu'elle pourra répondre sur cette question-là.
Ça ressemble à ça. Hein? C'est Netanyahu, mais ça dit Nosferatu en route vers Rafah.
Écoutez, j'ai pas... faudrait que j'en prenne connaissance, là, vous me présentez ça, mais je pense que le signal qu'on a envoyé hier à la Chambre des communes, si vous faites référence à la motion, je pense que c'était une motion qui était équilibrée et qui reprenait largement la politique étrangère du Canada depuis des décennies.
C'est un compromis imparfait que vous avez fait.
Vous savez, la vie est rarement parfaite, mais ce que je peux dire, c'est que ça reprenait le consensus de la politique étrangère canadienne depuis des décennies.
Monsieur Housefather, pour Monsieur Housefather,
votre homologue, M. Fitzgibbon, au Québec, disait hier qu'il y a trop de voitures au Québec. Demande aux villes de s'en charger. Vous pensez quoi de ça? Est-ce qu'il y en a trop de voitures, même électriques?
Ben, écoutez, il faut faire la distinction entre les milieux urbains, les milieux, les régions aussi. Vous savez, en région, c'est encore la façon de se déplacer, c'est en véhicule. Évidemment, on est dans une pleine transition vers les véhicules électriques. C'est sûr qu'en milieu urbain, on favorise toujours le transport en commun. On le fait dans plusieurs villes. On investit, vous savez, quand j'étais ministre de l'Infrastructure, on investit des milliards pour faciliter le transport en commun dans les villes. Je pense que c'est la bonne chose. Mais il faut être quand même conscient de l'immensité du territoire canadien et québécois. C'est sûr que quand vous êtes en ruralité, quand vous êtes en région, oui, il y a des solutions de transport en commun, mais quand même, il faut accepter que les gens, pour se déplacer, vous savez, quand vous habitez à Shawinigan, se déplacer, ça prend un véhicule dans la plupart des cas. Donc, je pense qu'il faut être balancé dans cette façon de voir-là, favoriser le transport en commun en milieu urbain, certainement, puis être conscient quand même de l'enjeu des citoyens et des citoyennes. Vous savez, mon comté, c'est plus grand que la Belgique, alors vous comprendrez qu'il n'y a pas une station d'autobus à tous les coins de rue.
Vous allez faire quoi?
Can I ask you about the grocery code of conduct? We haven't heard about that in a while. Are you still considering legislating it?
Everything is on the table. I've been pushing again. I keep pushing because I think that's the right thing for consumers. It's the right thing for farmers, and it's the right thing for independent grocers. That's one of the things they've been asking again and again. And I hope that we only have two players now, Loblaws and Walmart, which are not on board.
This has been a problem for months. Like, is there a red line in terms of time?
They should listen to the government. They should listen to the industry. They should also listen to customers, because at the end of the day, customers have been pretty clear with respect to what they want, and we're certainly considering everything.
But there's no deadline for them either get on board or we're going to legislate this?
People have seen that when things don't go the way we want, we legislate. You know, if history is a guidance of the future, they should look at last time when we said we asked something, we were not satisfied, we passed legislation, we move on. Listen, if history is any guidance, people should look at what we've done and what we're prepared to do.
Vous allez lui demander quoi à monsieur? Comment vous allez lui parler à monsieur Housefather? Vous voulez qu'il reste, je présume? Qu'est-ce que vous allez lui dire pour qu'il reste?
Ben, moi, j'ai été très clair. C'est un collègue qui est important au sein de notre caucus. Sa voix, la voix de la communauté, est importante au sein de notre caucus. Il est très respecté au sein du caucus.
Là, il est très frustré.
Et moi, j'ai toujours eu une ligne de communication directe avec lui. Je l'apprécie beaucoup. Et comme je dis, moi, je souhaite qu'il continue de faire valoir cette voix-là qui est très importante.
Mais s'il a l'impression que sa voix n'est pas entendue, pourquoi il reste?
Bien, sa voix, elle est entendue. Maintenant, ensuite de ça, il y a des décisions qui sont prises, mais je peux dire que Anthony, pour tous les gens qui nous regardent, les gens de la communauté à Montréal et ailleurs, c'est une voix forte. Moi, je dirais, Anthony Housefather, c'est une voix forte, c'est un collègue qui est très, très respecté. Et c'est pour ça que c'est important d'avoir des gens comme Anthony au sein du caucus. Merci tout le monde. Listen, he's a very respected member of our caucus. The voice of his community is essential within our caucus. I personally like him very much. He's highly respected by all colleagues, and we want voice like Anthony inside our caucus. You know, that's how we make better decisions. So obviously, I wish him to be with us for the long run, because I think a voice like him makes a difference within our caucus and is very important.
But he's feeling that it hasn't, right? Like he's feeling that there's been no difference.
I can tell you, Anthony is heard. Then after that, there's decisions that are taken. But I would say Anthony is a key voice within our caucus, and he represents a community which is key also within our caucus. So, you know, I have enormous respect for him. I like him personally. He knows that, and I'm always there to listen to him. Merci.
You're here when he leaves.
Is that communities are well within their right to make a decision about which reforms that they want to implement that are clearly within their jurisdiction. But similarly, we're free to fund the communities that advance the most ambitious reforms. We have no shortage of extremely ambitious applications that have come in. So from my perspective, if a community wants to do less than their neighbor, that's their choice, but we're going to fund the more ambitious neighbor.
And this, Minister Fraser, there seems to be some talk in Ontario about legalizing 4 units as of right across the province. They might come out in that new housing supply update in the spring. If that happens, it looks like all those municipalities like Windsor and Oakville who rejected your demand to put that in as a bylaw as a way to get housing accelerated funding. What do you make of that? Like, what do they do now that maybe the province goes over their head and now they've lost out on housing accelerator funding on this particular issue?
So I'm not in control of what the province is going to do. I think it's a very healthy conversation for us to be having in the midst of a housing crisis about adopting universally higher standards when it comes to what you're allowed to build. It's quite honestly a bad policy in a housing crisis to make it illegal to build the kinds of homes that are going to help bring to an end that housing crisis. So I think it's a very healthy conversation for Ontario to be having, but I'm not within, I don't have control over what policies a provincial legislature may adopt. As the law stands now, we have an opportunity to increase the overall ambition by selecting the most ambitious applications. So if some of the cities that have expressed reservations about adopting the kinds of reforms that we've published as the best practices for applicants to the Housing Accelerator Fund, if they choose not to adopt them, they shouldn't expect to receive funding. So from my perspective, we're going to deal with the law as it is now. If the provincial legislature decides to upzone in a universal way communities right across the province, then it will be unfortunate for those communities who chose not to do it on their own imperative and miss out on the fund. But as it stands now, with the laws that exist now, that's a choice that those communities are making.
Every month, the CMHC comes out with new data, and it shows that housing starts are still down widely across the country, especially in metropolitan areas. At what point or what what timeline do you see for the effects of the Housing Accelerator Fund to be borne out in the data? When do we start to see that improve?
Sure. Well, we actually saw the CMHC report showed a significant increase in permits, almost 14% this month compared to just last month. And they actually highlighted certain communities, going from memory here. It included London, Waterloo, I believe Kitchener, Toronto. There was a few others as well. But what struck me as very interesting when I looked at the most successful communities when it came to that drove that overall increase, all of them were recipients of funding through the Housing Accelerator Fund. All of them are actually implementing measures right now to make it easier to build homes more quickly. Now, it's too early to say with certainty whether that trend is going to continue to see that extraordinary growth. 14% month over month is significant, but it's a good sign of things to come. What I expect we're going to see when it comes to permits is that it's not driven exclusively by one thing. It'll depend on a range of factors, including the rate of interest that the Bank of Canada sets, including accessible workforces who are actually going to get the work going. But if we're actually looking at what the Housing Accelerator Fund is meant to do, it's meant to drive up the pace of actually issuing permits to make it easier to build more units, and the early signs are very positive given the CMHC report of just a few days ago.
Do you have a comment on the Auditor General's report yesterday about Indigenous housing?
We know that we need to do more to cure the inequities that exist. To me, it's a given that governments need to focus on not just building more homes, but focusing on the groups that have been disproportionately impacted in a negative way. We have more than 150 years of history of discrimination against Indigenous peoples across this country, and housing is one of the key areas that we have significant more work to do. Despite the extraordinary differences between communities across Canada that are not Indigenous and the challenges around housing in Indigenous communities, I do have some optimism of what we're going to see over the course of the next few years. Not just out of a blind sense of things will get better, but as a result of policies that are actually going to be rolling out. We now have a $4 billion fund that's starting to reach communities through the distinctions-based stream 2 budgets ago that we put in place. And it's a different approach that we've taken. Rather than an Ottawa knows best attitude, we're actually have made the determination that communities know their needs best. For communities who are making decisions about housing within their communities, we want to directly fund them to make decisions that they know will work more effectively. Similarly, we have a $4.3 billion fund to serve Indigenous peoples in urban, rural, and northern environments who may have become detached from their community. When you have a total of more than $8 billion targeting specifically Indigenous housing needs, we're going to see progress. It's never going to be as fast as I would like, but I think fairness, equity, and a sense of equality in Canada demands that we increase the investment to build housing targeting Indigenous communities.
But Indigenous advocates have said that they are frustrated with the rollout of that funding. They said it hasn't come quickly enough, considering that, as you just said, it was in the budget 2 years ago.
So there's 2 separate funds that we're talking about. One of them was developed 2 years ago, and some of that money is actually flowing now. We work to co-develop with national Indigenous organizations and other partners streams of funding that would actually reach communities, and we're starting to see progress now. There is a separate fund targeting housing needs in urban, rural, and northern environments. The first tranche of that funding is being administered by an organization called Nishi. They are now on the verge of rolling out that first tranche of funds, so a little less than $300 million. We expect in the very short term that we're actually going to be selecting the organization that will form the national center to actually roll out the majority of the balance of that $4 billion. And what we're talking weeks away from being able to select that entity if we remain on track. It will take a little bit of time, but the investment that we put in up front to get it right will have a very, very positive yield, not just over the next number of months, but this is meant to change the way that we fund housing to target this extraordinary disparity between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples for the next number of generations. So I do have faith that over the course of this year we're going to see meaningful progress, and again, it's driven by the fact that I'm spending a lot of my time working with the people who know the solutions to these challenges and are working every day to advance them. Excellent. Okay, thanks very much, folks.
You know what, I can't respectfully. I've given 10 interviews, 3 scrums. I was quoted in the close, and negotiation and understanding the reality of the situation, it came back to a broad consensus.
How much tension has it caused? Yes. How much tension has this motion caused within
Well, it causes tension. Of course it is. It causes tension around the world. It causes tension in our society. It causes tension in our ridings. It causes tension in this room.
You have an MP that is considering leaving the caucus over it, though. Is that not, that's a bit more tense than usual, is it not?
Well, of course it is.
And what do you think Anthony Housefather should do?
I hope he stays.
You guys are contending. The circumstances are different, though, with this tension because you're contending with low poll numbers, growing calls for Trudeau to resign as leader. Does this complicate matters for the caucus?
The Liberal caucus is the only caucus of all 4 caucuses that actually has real debates. You can mail it in if you're in the Conservative caucus. Same with the Bloc. Same with the NDP. So there's actually real diversity in the Liberal caucus. That in turn creates some tension, of course, understandably, when people have different views and deeply held views. But I think it actually demonstrates that the Liberal caucus is the only representative caucus for all Canadians.
Does this show cracks, though, in the caucus?
Our society's got cracks, doesn't it? If caucus wasn't representing our society.
Yeah. Do you know most of the Liberals prior to